on to probably one of the biggest stories of the day. And unless you've been under a rock, this kind of broke sort of fairly late last night. So it's sort of the sidebar there down the side of page 2. The main story on page 2 is about the number of Palestinians who've been seized in the West Bank and Gaza by Israelis, 7,000 apparently, arrested, some of them without charge, some of them in the hope of prisoner swaps, hopefully. But on the right-hand side there's this problem that Keir Starmer's currently got with 2 prospective MPs in his own party. They seem to be mired in anti-Semitism yet again. So take us through this a little bit, Jeremy. How did this all come about? It sort of started with Azhar Ali, hasn't it?
It did, yeah. He was basically he was recorded by someone at a meeting where you may expect that someone wouldn't secretly record you. It was a Labour meeting, and that was leaked to the Mail on Sunday. So obviously someone's gone along there with an agenda against him. It doesn't detract, however, from what he said, which was unforgivable. You know, the suggestion that the Israelis were complicit and you know, allowed the attack to happen in order to carry out the war in Gaza. I mean, I was in Israel just before Christmas and saw footage of the attacks which triggered all of this, and just it's beyond words what happened, really. So, you know, one cannot excuse what he said, and I think Labour, having initially supported him, then discovered a bit more of the context of it and a little bit more of what he'd said, and just felt that even though it was disastrous from this particular by-elections perspective, because they're not going to be able to field a candidate, they couldn't countenance him as their representative.
Yeah. Now, what do you think about this, everybody? This has been a bit of a mess, it's fair to say. So Azhar Ali, who was selected as the Labour candidate for an upcoming by-election in 2 weeks' time, all right, who can't be taken off the ballot at this point. The Mail on Sunday came along and said, we've got a tape of him saying something anti-Semitic, that Israel allowed the October 7th massacre to happen as a pretext for going to have this war in Gaza, which obviously was a bit mad. Labour made him kind of come out with a fairly strong statement. Azhar Ali said, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And then Labour held on to him, really, for a couple of days. And they said, well, there's you know, he's apologised and we can all move on. Kayani says, why is it when someone says anything against Israel, it's called anti-Semitic? We'll get to that in a minute, Kayani. Hang around and you'll find out. Now, that was a couple of days. And then the Daily Mail came out with another bit of tape, which was found to have said that, you know, there were Jews in the media that were making things happen, that Azhar Ali said, that they were misreporting it, that this other guy, and it just kind of got worse and worse and worse. And then Keir Starmer had to be a little bit firmer. And here's a clip of what he said.
Certain information came to light over the weekend in relation to the candidate. There was a fulsome apology. Further information came to light yesterday calling for decisive action. So I took decisive action. It is a huge thing to withdraw support for a Labour candidate during the course of a by-election. It's a tough decision, a necessary decision.
So it looks a bit like they thought, to start with, you know, well, this is bad, but he's on the ballot paper. We've got to try and tough it out. And then they realised it was worse than bad, and they had to withdraw support because they suddenly needed to look decisive, and they were looking a bit of a mess. Now, Jeremy, there's one thing though that really occurs to us. We've all seen over the last few years that Keir Starmer's changed the Labour Party. He's had big crackdowns on anti-Semitism and people saying the wrong thing and getting the machinery under his control, if you like. So how did 2 people who expressed these views get to be prospective candidates? How did they get through the net?
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it, in this context, without a shadow of a doubt. And it's catastrophic because of the timing of it, unfortunately. One can only imagine that they just haven't expressed anything of that nature, any of those kinds of views when they were being chosen, when they were being selected, when they went through that process.
Yeah. There's also, I suppose, the possibility that some of those who are doing the selections at the base of the party, the grassroots, perhaps are still sympathetic towards some of those views, despite what the top of the party has tried to change.
Without a detailed knowledge of the process and what you have to go through, it's difficult to make that judgment, really. And I think what you see is what you get. Ultimately, you cannot excuse the views that were expressed. whether they felt they were in a safe place because it was in a Labour meeting, and maybe there could be labouring under the wrong understanding as it transpires that whatever they said was never going to be reported anywhere, which is always a very, very dangerous assumption. But as I said at the outset, it doesn't excuse the views themselves. That's the thing, and how he got through and the nature of the process is really crucial. That's what they're going to have to look at in terms of making sure that error isn't repeated, really.
Yeah. Now, Mike says Tory MPs are queuing up to condemn this pretty swift action by Labour. Not everyone would agree it was swift, but I suppose comparatively, having lied for, defended and covered up for far more serious wrongdoing among their own. They defended Peter Bone for years and then put his girlfriend up for a seat tomorrow. One of those things, isn't it, in politics, that you kind of have to support your guy up to a point, and then there's up to a point that you can't go past. And I suppose it's about how long it takes to get to that point, or where each party individually seems to have set the point by which you won't support them anymore. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think that Azhar Ali, if he's addressing a Labour meeting, really he should just, that's fine, and he can say whatever he likes and he shouldn't have been taped? Or do you think when he's addressing a Labour meeting, of course they've got every right to sort of tape their prospective candidate and check his thoughts, and maybe if they're, errant in some way, publicise it if they wish to? Nabila says Labour misunderstood the views of the MP. This is part of the selection process. There should have been a really thorough interview to know what his views were on this and to see if they chime with the party or not. You can't really put someone up, especially in a by-election and in a general election year, who's going to cause this kind of trouble. There's a lot of PR that gets involved in this sort of thing. But we'll go back to Kayani's issue about how anyone who's sort of against the views of the actions of the Israeli government turns out to be accused of anti-Semitic. There is a fundamental problem with this conflict in the Middle East, and it's to do with picking a side, right? So you've got Iran, Hamas, Palestine, others in the region are all against Israel, not because the government's behaved badly, not because of Israeli government actions, but from day dot, because they're Jewish. And they don't want a Jewish state. They want the state wiped out. They want the people wiped out. They do not want an autonomous Jewish homeland. They want to throw gay people off tall buildings. They want to stone adulterers to death. For the love of Pete, don't try being trans if Palestine gets its own state under Hamas, because that's not going to be great. So if you are pro-Palestine, quite wrongly in some cases, but it sometimes looks like you are pro all those other things as well. Yeah, and on the other hand, if you support the right of Israel to exist, if you say, well, of course they have to have a homeland, and the Kingdom of Israel has been there for 5,000 years on and off, and it's never been an autonomous Palestinian or Arab state in that place, you're said to be complicit in the actions of the current government in some way, a government that doesn't have widespread support in its own internally, that needs a war to stay in power, that I don't see why it's not possible, really, but it isn't. It's not possible to say you like both sides or you are against both sides, or that you are against genocide in general and you think Israel should exist and Palestine should exist. There doesn't seem to be that argument, does there, Jez? And you've been in Israel, and I've worked in Israel briefly as well. It's not the kind of country where they even have that debate internally either sometimes. But that's the problem that we've got, isn't it, with people in this country who want to have a row about what's happening in other countries. It's really tribal. It's really binary. It's really, there's no effective argument saying, well, I can support both or dislike both. It's become one or the other. It's a cultural war. In the Middle East, it's literally a war between cultures. And here, it's something that just seems to divide people, and you've got to be on one side or the other. And they don't have any crossover. They are completely against and opposing each other. And Labour seems to be quite infected with, its pro-Palestine stance, or pro-two-state solution stance even, seems to be infected with the Hamas ideals, and the fundamental reason we don't already have a Palestinian state, which is that Palestinians are too anti-Semitic to have one.
I mean, what strikes you when you're there is what you just outlined, really, just how it seems almost impossible to find a solution where they're going to live side by side. Because of the history and the fact that one atrocity that just begets another, really, and there's been a long history of that. And you're right what you say. You cannot justify what happened in the October 7 attacks, nor would I seek to. But you have to then ask, is it proportionate to kill 20,000 civilians in the search for the people who actually carried out those attacks, including, well, 5,000 or 6,000 children? Is that proportionate? Now, it strikes me that the vast majority of people would question that, and it's right to question that, because it's wrong, isn't it? And both of the acts are wrong, but there is no easy solution. I find it really, really difficult to imagine how they will live side by side again. Certainly in the way that they did before, anyway, because that kind of very, cautious trust, if one can put it that way, that sort of very brittle security that they had in place on the border between the two, which was broken by the attacks. I don't know if they're ever going to get that. They'll ever be able to return to that, really. And my concern is that you've got these refugees, hundreds of thousands of refugees who are living there now. They're on about potentially bombing the place where they are, and it looks like it's just an attempt to eradicate an entire nation, really. I mean, that's it sounds rather dramatic, that, because obviously there's hundreds of thousands of survivors, but where are they going to go if they start bombing the refugee camps?
Yeah, exactly. So we have this situation now with the Israeli government that's suggesting airstrikes on Rafah, which is the area near the border with Egypt where many refugees have fled, having been told to flee there by the Israeli government when they were bombing the north of the country. They've all fled south, and now they want to bomb the south bit. Because, of course, if you are a Hamas terrorist, where are you? Yeah, you're in the refugee camp in the south, aren't you? Not getting bombed. So when Labour talks about its two-state solution and that's the best solution, I tend to think, like you, Jeremy, who on earth wants that guy as your neighbour? It doesn't matter if you're in the same state or in the state next door. You've got a wall between you, and it's never gonna be. But Labour have to get back to Labour to some extent. So, we've unpicked a little bit about the Middle East, but Labour's got this issue now. In 2 weeks' time, they're going to have a by-election in Rochdale, which is as red as it gets, right? People's Republic of Lancashire. People who would want to vote Labour are now going to really not know quite who their candidate might be. Are they going to vote for Azza Ali, who is going to be an independent? Or they're going to try and they don't have anyone else to vote for. You can't add someone else to the ballot at this point. You've also got Reform on there, which is the former MP Simon Danchuk, who may be a bit recognisable. You've got George Galloway on there, who will be causing all kinds of trouble. You've obviously got the Tories and the Lib Dems and all the rest of it. I suspect you'll get a lot of people staying home in 2 weeks' time because they don't have someone to vote for. And then you've got this other candidate, Graham Jones, who's standing in the Lancashire seat of Hyndburn this year at some point in the general election. He's not up immediately, but he's also been on tape at the same meeting saying that people who serve with the Israeli Defence Forces, Britons who serve with the Israeli Defence Forces, should be locked up, even though that's not actually a crime. So there's two candidates now, which Keir Starmer has had to go, well, they're not our guys anymore. They're nothing to do with us. In Hyndburn, Graham Jones, they can drop him as the candidate and find a new one. They've got a few months until the next general election. But Azza Ali, if he were to be returned and does go to Parliament, and he's just an embarrassment, isn't he? He's an independent MP. He used to be Labour. He's now officially considered, even despite his apology, to be anti-Semitic by his former party. And if he was to go and sit in the House of Commons, I mean, it's just a humiliation that Rishi Sunak's going to point out every 5 minutes. But he's not going to be there very long, probably, is he, Jeremy?
I suppose that's the only, in this car crash that has been the past 3 or 4 days for Labour, that's the only saving grace, that if he were to win, he's not going to be there for long. As you rightly point out, what a Labour voter does in this by-election, goodness only knows. How would you advise them? Obviously, you would advise them not to vote for him, given the views that he's expressed. Then they're left with, well, where do we go? Do we not vote? Do we vote for another party? It's very difficult. It's impossible for a Labour voter in that context to make a decision above and beyond thinking, well, I'm going to get another go in a few months' time.
Yeah, it's not going to be very long. I would advise people, I think, if you're in Rochdale, just abstain this time. That was a mess. It's been horrific. But I think there's some issues for the local Rochdale Labour Party as to how they managed to let this guy through, and they've caused this kind of humiliation for the national leadership in a general election year. Alan says Rochdale need to vote for Monster Raving Loony Party. Well, yeah, that would pretty much cover it. I'm not sure if they're standing, but they usually do. Unfortunately, Trump isn't there this time.
I thought they'd gone the Monster Raving Loony Party, but I could be wrong. I thought they no longer exist. But I think
they've been replaced by the Tories, haven't they? They're still operating.
Controversial.
They're still operating.
Not many people would argue with that, mate.
They seem to change different colour rosettes week by week. We'll find out, I'm sure, later in the year when a general election finally gets called. I reckon in about 6 weeks.